Theo, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's such a pleasure to get to spend some time with you. I've been such a huge fan back in the late '90s, early 2000s. You as a hockey player, and had no idea that there was all of this whole journey that you've been on at that time.
Yeah.
And so for those of you who don't know you, I think it's important. Probably a lot of people on this podcast listening already know who you are, but
Great.
This is a guy who scored over 1,000 points in the NHL, won the Stanley Cup, won a gold medal twice, I think. Is that right? With Canada?
Just once.
Once.
Once at the World Junior, and then World Cup. Well, it was called the Canada Cup back then, which is now the World Cup of Hockey. So I won that, and then topped it all off with the gold medal in 2002. So yeah, pretty awesome stuff.
Pretty awesome stuff, to say the least.
Yeah.
And one thing that we're really interested in hearing, I'm interested in hearing about is, when you were playing at that level for so many years. I mean, we're talking about a long career. I mean, this was 10, 15, long time.
Yeah,
many years.
I played 15 years. So
yeah, 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
What is your sense now of how you were able to play at that level with all the things that you were dealing with in your life?
Well, I subscribe to the Malcolm Gladwell theory of 10,000 hours. So I started playing hockey when I was 5, and then I left home at 15 to pursue, my career in professional hockey, wherever that took me. And, in those 10 years, like, I spent every waking moment at the arena, practicing, just the basics, skating, shooting, and passing, right? Over and over and over and over again. And basically what I did, and I had no idea I was doing this at the time. I was, escaping a very troubled home environment, right? Where both my parents experienced childhood trauma in their life. And then that manifested itself into addiction as a coping mechanism. And so basically for the first, 15 years of my life, I watched my parents' trauma fight with each other nonstop, every day, all day long, And my mom was a prescription pill addict. My dad was an alcoholic. And so, when I was at the rink, I didn't have to be at home, right? And so, my mom often told me, she said, I'm just going to move your bed down to the rink because, that's where you are. And she never had to worry about me, right? Like, nobody had to worry about me because they knew where I was all the time. And basically, if you think about our sport, it's a very reactionary sport, right? And the guys that overthink the game don't have very long careers, okay? Because in our sport, the puck moves faster than you can think. And so in those 10,000 hours, I basically trained myself to react, right? And, we would often have nights at the arena, because there was no Xbox and no cell phones or nothing. We'd have 50 people show up to play shinny, and it was 25 on 25. Like, there was no shifts. Like, everybody was on the ice. And so, I learned how to play in small spaces, which is really what the game is all about, right? If you can manage yourself in those small areas and those small spaces, and that's what really made me great was all that training, all that. And when I stepped on the ice, like, I didn't have to think. Honestly, I did not have to think about nothing. I just let my natural ability and talent and all that hard work I put in was just natural, and so hockey was very easy for me. You know, it really was, and, because I thought the game on a different level. They call it hockey IQ, I guess, nowadays, but, it just was natural, and the game was easy. And so, people look at, all the off ice stuff and, are baffled that I was able to have the career that I had. But, when I explain it to them this way, it makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. It was a real refuge for you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it saved my life. Really, it really did. And the addiction did too. And the anger did too, right? All those things, made up, this guy that everybody said, you're never going to play in the National Hockey League, right? Because you're too small, you're too light, you're too this, you're too that. And, when I look in the mirror, I don't see somebody who's 5'6". I see somebody who is incredibly determined and is willing to work harder than anybody else. And I wasn't afraid to, get my nose dirty. And so all of those characteristics, made up this little guy that wasn't supposed to play. And ultimately I had to turn all the non-believers, into believers. And I got a great story to share with you. So there was 415 guys selected before me in the draft. Okay. Because the first year of eligibility, I didn't get drafted. And there was 12 rounds. The following year, I got picked in the 8th round. So basically 20 rounds of the draft went by. And the Calgary Flames had this scout who would come to Moose Jaw. And if you know where Moose Jaw is, in the middle of butt-fuck nowhere in Saskatchewan, where, it's pretty much minus 60 with the wind chill, from November till March, But this scout from the Flames kept coming to Moose Jaw to watch me play. And, every night he would write on a piece of paper, this guy was the best player on the ice. And it was like 50 times he wrote this down on a piece of paper. So the draft was in Detroit, and, this Ian McKenzie guy, who was the scout, kept bugging our general manager, who was Cliff Fletcher. You got to fucking draft this guy. Like he's going to go. And if we don't get him, we're going to be sorry. And so they go up, they draft me, and the assistant general manager, a guy named Al McNeil, had this beautiful Mont Blanc pen, and he threw it across the table, and he said, "We drafted another fucking jockey," is what he said, right? And so when I went to my first training camp, nobody in the organization believed that I could play, except for that one guy that sort of, went to bat for me. And by the time I had left to go back to junior that year, the whole entire organization, believed that, that I could play. And, what I always tell kids all the time is, it doesn't matter what number you get picked, it's where you finish. And right now, I think I sit 64th in all-time scoring in the history of the NHL. So, 415 guys were picked ahead of me, but, it's where I finished. And that's what's most important, right? And I just wanted an opportunity. I just wanted a chance, and the Flames gave me that chance, and I always obviously made the most of it.
Nice. Yeah, that's a powerful story there. And can you say a little bit about how your challenges helped you along the way? You said that, you said a couple comments that I think were really important. You said like the addiction even was important. You mentioned, and so I'm just curious if you could kind of paint the picture here of how these challenges and traumas kind of informed you to still shine in some. I mean, you shined in the NHL. You were right there shining at the top of the NHL. So I'm wondering, there's some way you were relating to your challenges, obviously, that they didn't crush you and keep you out of the NHL. So can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's such a loaded question, right? Because I could go in 50 different directions and give you 50 different answers to the question.
Yeah.
But I played with a tremendous amount of anger and rage from my childhood experience. And not only that, those of us who are traumatized, we have a thing inside of us called hypervigilance, right? And that hypervigilance served me so well on the ice, right? And also, I quickly sort of discovered that 98% of the guys that I was playing against were all bluffers, okay? Because I could see it in their eyes. I could feel their energy, right? And, you know, when somebody's afraid of you, you can pretty much do whatever you want to them, take them anywhere on the ice and do whatever you want to them, right? So not only was I a highly skilled, talented guy, but I was really cerebral, right? Because I'm brilliant, right? I'm smart, right? And, you know, all of that adversity in my early childhood built a tremendous amount of resilience in me, where I knew that no matter what they threw at me, I would figure it out. I would figure out a way to be successful. And, you know, like, I hate the word addiction. Like, I hate it. I think we should absolutely abolish it from every textbook or whatever, because there's so much shame attached to having an addiction. And really, what is it? What is addiction? Well, it's emotional pain management. That's what addiction is. And it's the greatest coping mechanism for trauma survivors at the beginning of their battle or struggle with mental illness or addiction, right? It's a way to suppress and numb out from the reality of what's going on in the world. And so when I stepped in the rink, I knew who I was, okay? When I left the rink, no idea who I was, right? I was pretty shy, but I had a big ego, right? You know, so I was an egomaniac with an inferiority complex. You know, I was a people pleaser. I was a fixer. I was an enabler, you know, all of these things. And so that didn't serve me very well away from the rink. But at the rink, I knew exactly who I was. And, you know, through the process of healing and recovery and therapy, you know, I've been able to make sense of the off ice behavior and why I did the things that I did. And then
we take that, Theo, let's take that for a moment. When did you start knowing? I mean, did you know your whole life, like, I've got some shit to deal with? Or was it like something started happening while you were playing hockey, when you started recognizing some of the feelings and behaviors you were having were actually, you know, based in a lot of pain from the past? Like, how did that start happening?
Well, my mental illness showed up in Colorado. Okay. You know, when I got traded from Calgary was one of the most crushing days of my life. Okay. Because I have some abandonment issues. I have some not good enough issues and all of that. And I felt really betrayed, you know. But on the other side of the coin, I was really excited because, you know, I was going from a situation that, you know, wasn't ideal to a situation where, you know, I'm fully dialed in, right? You know, every time I've had an opportunity to win, you know, I've been able to take full advantage of that and get the job done. And a couple months before I got traded, I got cross-checked right here. And I had a bruised vestibular nerve just above my ear, and which caused me to have vertigo and all that stuff. And so then my anxiety really kicked up at that point. And that's when the mental illness really showed up. Right. And then when I got to New York, it was, I was having panic attacks before the game. I was, I was falling into depression quite easily, all those things. And so by the time I got to Chicago, it was no longer manageable, right? My addiction was no longer manageable. My mental health was no longer manageable. And a lot of people are under the impression that it was my addiction that took me out of the game, and that is completely false. It was my mental illness disguised as an addiction that took me out of the game. And so, it was, those, I look back on those 3 or 4 years and just, I was so out of control, because where do I go for help? Who do I ask for help? I remember, one night we were playing in New York, and I was getting ready for a face-off, and I looked at the clock, and the clock went black, and I just fucking absolutely passed out on the ice, and went into the trainer's room, and the doctor was there, and I couldn't even explain to him what happened, And so what does he do? He prescribes me clonazepam, right? And here we go, here we go. And when I was in Chicago, I was on so much, they put me on so much Paxil that I was having body shocks during the games, and because we are sort of trained to trust doctors, that, I wasn't going to question what was going on. Right. And so, drinking and doing antipsychotic medication is not a good formula. And so, I blacked out in a bar one night and got into a scuffle with, 9 or 10 bouncers, and just I was out of control. I was completely out of control, and that's where I started the therapeutic process too, was in New York. I went to my first treatment center. I started talking to different therapists and all that. And so, looking back after the 2002 Olympics, I should have just walked away from the game, because I had accomplished pretty much everything that I wanted to accomplish. And I was done. I was done.
Were you, how long did it, I'm really curious about this, because the connection between trauma and emotional management tools like substances is in the world of so-called addiction treatment is a relatively new kind of development and new awareness. And I'm wondering, in those early days when you went to a treatment center, if you were you told, look, what a lot of people are told, like in 12-step, for example, like, look, you're an addict. You're always going to be an addict. This is a biological, condition.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with, nobody talked about, did anybody talk about trauma at that time with you, or?
We sort of quick peek, Yeah. And basically, now that I've been in this space now for 15 years and being an advocate and an activist, the 30-day treatment model doesn't work, because what they do is they take away all your coping mechanisms, fill you a belly full of AA, and then they send you back out onto the street. And so 5 minutes after you get out of treatment, what happens? You get triggered. And what do? You go back to what you know, right?
Yeah.
You know you know how to do that, right?
Yeah. You go get the tools that you know how to use.
Yeah. And, but I can tell you that some of the tools that I have in my toolbox today, I acquired them in every treatment center, and that I use them, and I subscribe to the fact that relapse is part of recovery. There's very few people, I believe, that actually get it the very first time, because there has to be a spiritual transformation that has to happen in order for you to gain the strength and the knowledge to be able to, stop one day at a time. Right. It's a process, but because there's so much shame attached to, the affliction that, and I'm really good at beating the shit out of myself. Right. And so every time I failed, I felt more shame than when I was getting sexually abused, because I knew what the sexual abuse was. Right. I didn't know what the addiction part was. Like, I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know how to quit, but I kept going into the rooms, and I kept listening. I kept coming back, like they say. And then all of a sudden it happened, it happened.
Can you tell us a little more about that and how that spiritual kind of transition happened for you?
Yeah. Well, I always had a concept of something greater than myself, because I was an altar boy in the Catholic Church, and, my mom was a Jehovah's Witness, these kind of things. So I always knew that, there was something greater out there. But, I didn't subscribe to the white bearded guy in the sky. Okay. Couldn't grasp onto that concept. Didn't really understand it. But, I remember this very well. This is a great story. So I was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico, because I went to a place called the Life Healing Center in Santa Fe, where we actually, in this treatment center, started to look at my trauma. Right. So I was doing like EMDR therapy. I was doing all of this sort of state-of-the-art new kind of holistic therapy. And I felt an unbelievable spiritual connection to this place. I don't know if you've ever been to Santa Fe, but, it is an incredibly spiritual place. And they had great recovery there. And so I ended up buying a house there and living there, because I knew if I didn't get it, I was probably going to die. Right. And so I used to go to this men's group on Wednesday nights in Santa Fe, and it was in this guy's backyard, like just this beautiful place, and it was all men sharing, being vulnerable and sharing their stories. So I was outside after the meeting having a smoke, and there was this old biker guy who used to go to these 12-step meetings, and he was a very handsome guy. He had beautiful long white hair. He was tanned, and he had this permanent whiskey voice. And so he came outside, and he said to me, how are you doing? And I said, I'm just fucking white knuckling it and just barely hanging on. And then he says, how are you doing with your higher power stuff? And I said, it's not happening. And then he said something to me I'll never forget. He said, do you realize in this program that you get to pick your own God? And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? And he said, yeah. He said, you get to pick your own God. And I was like, wow, I never really thought of that concept before. Right. So fast forward, couple of years later, I'm in a washroom on my hands and knees, and I'm drunk, I'm high, I'm crying, I'm done. Okay, I'm done. And I'm on my knees. And then I remember this conversation I had with Jack. So I said, okay, I'm going to give this God thing a try. So I went up one side of God. I went down the other side of God. I called him every name in the book that I could think of and made up a bunch of my own. And then I said, God, I realize you only give me as much as I can handle. I said, I am full. You cannot put one more thing on my plate. And then at the end of the conversation, I said, please, please, God, take away the obsession to drink and do drugs. And then I went to bed. And the next morning I woke up and I was walking to the washroom, and I had to walk by this big mirror on the way to the washroom. And as I was sort of, wiping the sleep out of my eyes, I glanced in the mirror and I stopped dead in my tracks. And I can't honestly tell you the last time I looked at myself in the mirror, because I was so full of shame and guilt and all this stuff that I never, so I started, staring at myself in the mirror. And then almost suddenly, as I started to do that, something inside of me, my chemistry or whatever, it changed. And then 40 minutes later, I was like, holy fuck, my prayer's been answered. And that was September 18th. 2005, and I haven't had a drink or a drug since. But I still have the ism, and I had to get rid of the ism, right? I had to look at the trauma. I had to make sense of the trauma. I had to step into compassion, empathy for myself, forgiveness, all of those things. And so, that therapeutic process has been ongoing and will be ongoing, for the rest of my life, because I'm in therapy for the rest of my life. And I'm okay with that, because every time I put myself in a therapeutic environment, I get better. I have more understanding. I have more self-care, self-love, all those things. And so ultimately, what is spirituality? To me, spirituality is all about relationship. That's ultimately what it is, right? Why do we go to church every Sunday? Because it's community, right? Why do we go to the arenas? Because it's church, it's community, right? So, and, the one relationship I neglected the most was the one I had with myself. Because after my abuser left my life, what happened? I took over the abuse and I abused myself, is what happened. And I had to stop all of that and then take a look at it and go, this is not who you are. You're way better than this. You're way better than what you're showing the world. And I didn't want to die. Like, I truly wanted to live. I did not want to die, and I think that was the catalyst that has sort of brought me, to this awesome place, that I live in today. There's no more chaos. There's no more drama. There's no, I live a pretty simple existence of life, where, I don't care about money. I don't care about things, I care about relationships, and people ask me, what do I do for a living? I tell them I collect people. That's what I do. That's my job, and that's my purpose. Right. And I stepped right into my purpose, and it's been one of the greatest things, that I've ever done. And, people always ask me, what's your greatest accomplishment in life? And I say my sobriety, and they're shocked, because I come with all these achievements, and it's something as simple as, I'm sober, and that's, because without my sobriety, I got nothing,
Yeah.
And sobriety is or alcohol and drugs is like a solvent, right? When I put it in my body, things start to disappear. Wives, kids, jobs, homes, cars, everything disappears when I put this shit in my body, right?
Yeah.
Right.
How, I mean, gosh, you've had such a journey, right? You've been through a very colorful and dynamic life. And how are you relating to the traumas now in terms of, like, when you think about what you've been through?
Yep.
And when you think about just what other people have been through, like how do you frame trauma in your head? And, do you have a positive relationship to trauma? Do you have like, it would have been better if it didn't happen? Like, how do you think about it?
I love my trauma. I love it. To me, trauma equals resiliency, right? Adversity creates, adversity is trauma. Trauma is adversity, right? And that adversity and trauma equal resilience. And my resilience is the only reason why I'm still alive today. Because like I said, I didn't want to die, right? And it was a catalyst, right? And, trauma is the greatest riddle that hasn't been solved on the planet. We have a systemic, unresolved trauma issue on the planet. Okay. And COVID-19 is the most traumatic event that's happened since World War II. Okay. So pretty much everybody on the planet has trauma. Well, they just added another layer of trauma on top of it. And what comes with COVID is more trauma because we're isolated. Community has been taken out. They're trying to take God out of the equation, right? They're just adding more trauma on top of the trauma. And, we grew up in the suck it up era, right? And now we're seeing the results of the suck it up era. We're at the highest amount of awareness on the planet that mental illness is as big as they say it is. We have the highest suicide rates in the history of our planet. And guess what? Nobody wants to talk about trauma, right? Because when I stand on stage and I say to my audience, I was raped 150 times by my coach. You know what happens to my audience? Every single head hits the floor. And they pass the shame on to me. And I have no more shame. I've done my work. That's why I'm able to say it, right? And there is no place for that type of communication. And that's the reason why we are in the state that we are in right now, is because we haven't created a safe, vulnerable place for people to talk about trauma.
Yeah, I mean, it's so well said what you're saying. And I totally agree. I mean, I think we're really at sort of a tipping point. We're seeing the results of how, that there's not permission culturally. There's not a container. There's not a way to talk about the challenge and suffering of the human condition. Yeah. And we call it trauma now in the modern age. We now have a framework to wrap it in something, to talk about it. Yeah. And, we're seeing the results of where we're, how that stigmatization of one whole side of reality is not really allowed to be talked about openly. And it's there's shame attached to it. There's a lot of issues. And so I just love how you're saying it. And I think you're right. We need to start talking about it.
Well, how many psychiatrists and psychologists haven't yet connected trauma to mental health and addiction? It fucking blows my mind that they haven't made the connection. Trauma, mental health, and addiction live in the same house.
Right.
They live in the same house. But what's the catalyst? Like, you don't wake up one morning and have mental illness. You don't wake up one morning and have addiction issues. There's some underlying thing that brings you into those two spaces. And it's trauma, right? And the fact that we have not made that connection is probably the reason why we're in the state that we're in right now, And I was guilty of it too. I didn't recognize that trauma, was going to be my biggest challenge that I faced in my whole entire life. And the fact that, I look at my trauma as a gift, right? People have I've done 800 speeches in the last 15 years and people still have a real tough time connecting that piece to why they have mental illness or why they have addiction issues or why they have relationship problems. They haven't connected that trauma piece. you know, and trauma is subtle. It doesn't have to be as extreme as mine. You know,
Right.
if your parents got divorced, that's trauma. If you're bullied in school, that's trauma. If you get diagnosed with cancer, that's trauma. Like, trauma is really subtle. And what trauma does is it leaves us in emotional pain and suffering, right? And then we produce way too much cortisol, which then frays our nervous system. And then we're really in big trouble, right?
Right. And then as you spoke so eloquently about, you use your intelligence and your resourcefulness to go find the coping strategy, you know, whether it's 10,000 hours on the ice from age 5 to 15, or whether it's, you know, going into work addiction, or going into relationship addiction, or going or substances, whatever the coping strategy at your fingertips, you're gonna go make use of that.
Yeah.
At that stage.
Yeah. There's
because you need treatment for the pain, and you're gonna go do it. And
one thing that I've discovered is you cannot outthink this. As a very highly intelligent guy, I tried to outthink it. Okay. And oh my God, what a fucking ride that was, you know? And ultimately, you know, in my title, in what I do, you know, I call myself an expert in relational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of our trauma happens in relationship. Okay. And how am I going to heal? I'm going to heal in relationship. Right. I need an external brain to come in and, you know, help me, because my brain doesn't work great, you know, when it comes to, you know, that piece. Right. And so, it is, you know, and it's a lifetime thing. Like, you know, I think Big Pharma, who basically own mental health, Big Pharma owns mental health. Well, they own pretty much everything, right? And what they sort of have taught us is that there's a magic pill that I can take, right? Well, guess what? I've tried them all. They don't work, right? And the reason why they don't work, and I'm going to go somewhere with this, is when I put something in its synthetic form in my body goes, what the fuck is this shit? It doesn't recognize it. Okay. And so what happens is we ultimately get a sludge of this synthetic version of whatever it is. And it gets filtered through our liver, through our kidneys, and through our intestines. And, you know, now we're feeling side effects from this, you know, thing. And so I'm an Aboriginal person. I'm an Indigenous person. And, you know, I've had the great honor and privilege of speaking in 420 of the 630 Aboriginal communities in Canada. And what happened was they gave me back my life spiritually, because I started, you know, I always say I took the cotton out of my ears and I put it in my mouth and I started to listen. And I started to listen to the elders, to the spiritual leaders, to the medicine men, and, you know, fully submerged myself into the Aboriginal culture and the Aboriginal spirituality. Like I do sweat lodges with one of the most powerful medicine men on the planet. And what he tells me is that there is a cure for every single disease in its natural state, in its natural form out there. Right. And, you know, I have seen him perform what we would call miracles, you know, and I can tell you that I have learned more about medicine from this man than any other human being on the planet. And what I love about him the most is he is the most serene person that I've ever met in my life. And in 12-step, we talk about the law of attraction, not promotion, right? And so, when I look at this guy, I'm like, I want that kind of serenity, right? That's the attraction. I want to be like him. I want to have that, And I also have a spiritual grandmother as well, who is exactly the same way, and she, survived the residential school system in Canada, right? And now she's this amazing person, her name is Shield Woman. And, I'm an honorary chief now. I'm a pipe carrier. And, I really believe that the Aboriginal people have a cure for whatever it is we need. And they do spirituality better than any sect denomination on the planet. I'm convinced of that. No question. Because what are the first 3 steps in the program of 12-step? Spirituality. Well, guess what happened? I skipped over those first 3 steps and I struggled, right? And then about 5 years into my sobriety, I hit a wall and I said, if this is what sobriety is, I don't want any part of it. And that's when that Shield Woman lady came into my life and started to teach me about spirituality. And as soon as the light bulb went off, I went to the next level of healing, of self-awareness and all these things, right? Because when you're in conscious contact with the higher being or the higher power, it's powerful. It is powerful.
Well, what would you
go ahead, Keith.
What would you tell the person right now who is really in the confusion and the puzzle and the chaos of the mental illness states we can get into, and they don't know where to go and what's next, and how to even guide themselves toward a healing, toward a step of a healing journey, like in that moment where things are just so confusing and so overwhelming? What would you tell that person?
Do you want help? Because if you don't want help, I can't help you. Right? So the most common email I get is, I have a son, I have a daughter, I have a niece, I have a nephew, I have a granddaughter who's going down the wrong path, and I don't know what to do. Okay? Well, what I've come to the realization is the person who's emailing me is the enabler. Okay? They're the enabler. And what are addicts and alcoholics really good at? We collect enablers. We collect them. Okay? Because the more enablers we have, the longer our behavior can last. But eventually, we make the enablers sick. And then they have to go take care of themselves. So I know that the person who's emailing me is the enabler. So I quickly email them back and I say, does this person you're talking about actually want help? And I would say 9 times out of 10, they email me back and say, no. Then I say, the only thing you can do is go look after yourself. Set healthy boundaries so that that person doesn't make you sick. And, anybody who's ever watched the show Intervention, it plays out on the screen exactly the way that I'm explaining it now. So they do an intervention and all the enablers are in the room and they put out their boundaries, and the addict goes, what do you mean? What do you mean you're not going to pay for my rent and pay for my drugs and buy my booze anymore? And they get freaked out. And they have two choices. They can either go to treatment or they can go out into the world and fend for themselves. And the ones that choose to fend for themselves, you know what happens to them? They either get into therapy or they die. And I tell the enablers, that is not your responsibility if they do die. And so what would I say to somebody who's struggling? We need your story of recovery. I need your story of recovery. That's what I need from you. I need your story, right? I need hope. I need inspiration, and if I can do it, fuck, anybody on the planet can do it, right? Because I couldn't stay sober for 5 minutes, right? I was in so much pain and emotional pain. Can't see it, right? We're all great at wearing lipstick. When we walk out our front door, we all are really great at, hiding the emotional pain and suffering, right? Unless you go to a bar and you see, 20 or 30 people in the bar who can't even talk and falling down and whatever, those people are in pain and they're suffering and they're medicating the emotional pain that's left behind from the traumatic experience, right? And, the best thing you can say to somebody is, you know what? You may not be able to see this. And, the last person that sees their life going down the tubes and down the drain is, the person you're looking at in the mirror. And what I tell the enablers is you say to them, I love you and I care about you. And I see that you're going down the wrong path and going down the wrong road. And I can't watch it anymore. But when you are ready for the help, I will be here every step of the way to help you achieve what you need to achieve.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And it's, it may sound harsh, but to me, that's, 16 years ago, I had a fully loaded pistol in my mouth, ready to pull the trigger because every single enabler had left me. Right. And, I was faced with the ultimate choice. Was I going to live or was I going to die? Well, I couldn't pull the trigger. So I'm like, okay, you want to live? Well, I have no idea how to live life on life's terms. All I know how to do is cope. That's it. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, there started the process of, I can't live in this amount of pain anymore. So I better take a look at it, right? I better take a look at it. I better understand it. I better figure it out, so that I can, because what's the ultimate goal? Peace, joy, happiness, and serenity. That's the ultimate goal in recovery. That's the goal.
Theo, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about what you're doing now as we get close to the end of our time together. And I think it'd be really inspiring. And you talk about needing an inspiration and hope. I think, where you've gotten to in your life is incredibly inspiring and hopeful for folks. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
So, I'm doing pretty much everything in the space, right? So, I'm a speaker. I'm an author. I write books. I do documentaries. I'm a musician. I'm a singer and a songwriter. I have a course online called Trauma Transformation Course. We have 200 members. And tonight we do two times a month group therapy sessions online, and we talk about trauma. It's a trauma group. I'm also a sobriety coach as well. I have 4 or 5 clients that I take care of. And what else do I do? What's interesting is, I've done every kind of therapy known to mankind. Like, I love therapy. Okay. I'm addicted to therapy. And I do it for myself, but I do it for other purposes too. Like, if something works, like, I'm talking about it, right? I'm talking about it, I'm sharing, I'm talking about it. Go try this or go try that. But ultimately, the most effective kind of therapy that I know and the cheapest kind of therapy I know is group therapy, because it doesn't cost anything. Okay. And, my secret sauce and the reason why I had a lot of success in this space is I'm vulnerable. Okay. And what does vulnerability do? It creates safety. And then once you have safety in the room, that's when the magic of healing happens. Okay. And I'm going to give you a really great example of this. So I wrote a second book called Conversations with a Rattlesnake. And my friend, Kim, who I wrote the book with, is an occupational therapist who is one of the brightest, smartest people that I know. And she basically told me that she could rewire my brain through relationship. And I was like, what? Really? So I'm a poker player, and I pushed all of my chips in the middle of the table, and I said to her, I'm all in. Show me how to do that. Okay. So the book is a 4-year conversation between her and I, helping rewire my brain through the art of conversation, through the art of vulnerability, through the art of safety. Okay. So her and I now do one-day healing conferences all over North America. So one day we're in Calgary and we have 100 people in our audience. And basically in the morning session, we are creating safety. We're using the vulnerability of storytelling to create a safe space. So right before lunch, I look to the right of the stage and there's a guy sitting there and he is all in. He's fully in. I can see his nonverbal communication. Like, this guy is fired up, right? So we go for lunch, come back from lunch. And I say to him, I've been watching your nonverbal communication. I said, would you like to share with the group? And he stands up and he says, I just want everybody in the room to know that I've never felt safer in my whole entire life. And he said, I've been carrying a secret around for a long, long, long time. And he said, I want everybody in this room to know that I molested my sister for 11 years. And Kim and I are looking at each other like, where the fuck is this going? Right. So we had 3 women in our audience who had been sexually molested by their brothers. You know what they did? They got up out of their chairs, went over and hugged this man.
Wow.
And I was like, I need more of this. I need to witness. I need to facilitate more of this kind of healing. Because ultimately, that's the kind of shit that gets me out of bed. That's the kind of stuff that gets me excited, that healing is 100% possible.
Wow. Powerful.
Yeah.
Powerful.
And that's the kind of stuff I witness almost every day doing this work, right? Because when the light bulb goes off, it goes off, right? And they never have to sit in that space anymore when the light bulb goes off. And so to be a facilitator of those light bulb moments is like, it's incredible. And it's ultimately why we do what we do, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Right. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, Theo, it's been such a deep pleasure to get to hang out with you and rap with you about your journey and the spiritual pearls, really. I mean, I would say, if you're okay with that, just like the downloads, the gifts, incredibly inspiring and helpful. I just want to thank you for your time.
Oh, yeah. Anytime. I truly, God had a plan for me, and the only time the plan goes sideways is when I fucking take over and try to run on my own, and, September 18th, 2005, I hit my knees in that washroom and I surrendered. And I just said, you take over, because it's not what I'm doing. It's not working, and that help was there, and it's been there, ever since. And so, like I said, there's always been a plan for my life, and this is definitely part of my plan,
Nice.
And it's part of the purpose. And, that's ultimately what I try to tell people is, we have every excuse in the book to be angry, to be resentful, to be, what society thinks we should be. But ultimately, if you can pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and find the courage and the strength to, share your trauma story with us, you can be a real asset to the cause, right?
Yeah.
Because
we end with a question that'll dovetail nicely off what you're saying, which is, with every guest we ask this question. So if there's a billboard that every human would see once in their lifetime, had 4 to 7 sentences on it, like a paragraph, what would you want every human to just hear from you once in their lifetime?
Wow. Don't quit before the miracle. Don't quit before the miracle, right? I'm a miracle. I'm a living, walking, breathing miracle, and recovery is not easy, but it gets easier, right? And it's not for everybody, right? My first AA sponsor, because a bunch of people I was in treatment with passed away, and I was devastated. And so I went to my AA sponsor and I said, like what's going on? Why are these people doing this? And he goes, well, some of us have to die so some of us can live, and I've seen it, I've seen it way too many times, but, sometimes the pain is too great to overcome, and some of us, just don't have the will to continue. Right. And that's okay. Like that's okay too, because I know I've been to that, the ultimate place, and, like I said, God had a bigger plan for me. Maybe God has a different plan for different people, and, but faith is the only thing that keeps me sane. Truly, the spiritual part is the only thing that's going to get you to the promised land. Right. And and there's, take bits and pieces of every religion, everything out there and make it your own, right? Just make it your own. You don't have to follow, anything, right? Because ultimately, peace, joy, happiness, and serenity. That's the ultimate goal. Some of us, I'm not there yet, I'm not there yet, but I think I can get there, right? And that's what, that's the hope that I give myself every day, right?
Well, thanks
as long as I'm vulnerable, right? As long as I'm vulnerable,
Thanks so much for sharing your story, Theo, and being on the show. It was so good to meet you and connect and have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Well, I'm available anytime.
Cool.
I'm in this for the rest of my life. So.
Nice.